One signal reached Earth, and the galaxy felt fear for the first time. The universe had been watching humanity for a very long time, for 12,000 years. The great powers of the galaxy had kept their eyes on one small blue planet spinning around an ordinary yellow star in a quiet corner of the Milky Way. They called themselves the Galactic Concord, and they believed they owned everything. The Concord was made of 3 ancient races that had ruled the stars for longer than humans had existed as a species. First were the Vethkai, beings made of living crystal that sparkled like diamonds and thought themselves the wisest creatures in existence. The second were the Sarthi, a hive mind of insect-like warriors that shared one consciousness across billions of bodies and believed strength was the only truth. The third were the Illumina, creatures of pure energy that had abandoned physical form millions of years ago and considered themselves above all other life together. These 3 races had built an empire that stretched across 17 spiral arms of the galaxy. They had discovered faster than light travel when humans were still living in caves. They had mapped every star and claimed every world worth claiming, and when they found Earth, they made a decision that would haunt them forever. The Concord watched as strange primates climbed down from trees and began to walk upright. They watched as these creatures learned to use fire and make tools. They watched as humans began to fight each other, to kill each other, to wage wars over land and food and ideas that existed only in their minds. High Arbiter Thiessen of the Vethkai had studied the reports with growing concern. They are dangerous, she declared to the Concord Council, her crystal body pulsing with worry. They fight constantly, even among themselves, and they learn too quickly, and they never stop pushing forward no matter how many times they fall. Commandant Rethus of the Sarethi swarm agreed, though he showed no fear. They are violent primitives, he said, through 1,000 mouths speaking as one. They will destroy themselves before they ever reach the stars. But the ancient Illumina representative, a consciousness called Pale Dawn that had existed for 3 million years, was not so certain. I have watched many species rise and fall, Pale Dawn said, its form flickering with something like unease. These humans are different, and I cannot explain why, but they frighten me. The Concord debated for many cycles before reaching a decision. They would not destroy humanity, for that seemed wasteful and cruel. They would not contact humanity, for that seemed too dangerous. Instead, they would build a cage. The quiet wall was the greatest prison ever. Constructed it was a network of thousands of satellites arranged in a perfect sphere around the entire solar system. These satellites would absorb every signal that tried to escape from Earth, every radio wave and television broadcast and radar pulse, and they would block every signal trying to get in. Humanity would be allowed to grow, but they would grow alone. They would never know that the universe was full of life. They would never know that someone was watching them. They would never know they were prisoners for 12,000 years. The quiet wall worked perfectly. Humans invented the wheel and built pyramids and sailed across oceans. Humans created empires and fought world wars and split the atom. Humans walked on their moon and sent robots to other planets and filled their skies with satellites, and all the while, their signals bounced off the invisible wall and came back to them. And they believed they were alone in a vast and empty cosmos. The Concord watched and waited. Surely these violent creatures would destroy themselves eventually. Surely their constant wars and conflicts would end them, but humanity did not end. Instead, they kept growing stronger, and then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the quiet wall failed. It was such a small thing. Really, a single maintenance node in the satellite network experienced a software error for exactly 0.003 seconds. A tiny gap opened in the wall, and in that tiny gap, a signal slipped through. It was an automated beacon. one of millions that the Concorde broadcast across the galaxy to warn other species away from their territory. The message was simple, and it was broadcast in 4,000 languages, it said. This galaxy is claimed and ordered by the Galactic Concorde, and all emerging species must submit to Concorde authority or face elimination, and resistance will not be tolerated. The beacon reached Earth at 3:47 a.m. Pacific time. It was picked up by a radio telescope in California, where a young scientist named Dr. Amara Okonkwo was working the night shift at first. She thought it was a malfunction, then she thought it was a prank, then she ran the signal through her analysis software and watched as it translated itself into perfect English. And her blood ran cold. Dr. Okonkwo called her supervisor. Supervisor called the director. The director called the government within 6 hours. Every major government on Earth had received a copy of the translation within 12 hours. They understood what it meant. Humanity was not alone. Humanity had never been alone, and someone out there had been deliberately hiding the truth from them. The world learned the news in waves. Some people panicked, and some people prayed, and some people refused to believe it was real. Governments held emergency meetings behind closed doors. Military leaders demanded action, but had no idea what action to take. Religious figures struggled to explain what this meant for their faiths. The internet exploded with theories and fears and wild speculation, but something strange happened in the days that followed. The panic faded. The arguments stopped. A strange quiet fell over the planet for the first time in human history. Every person on Earth understood that they faced a common enemy, not each other. Something out there. Something that had watched them struggle and suffer for thousands of years without ever offering help. Something that had kept them trapped like animals in a zoo. And in that quiet, humanity began to change. Old enemies met in secret and shook hand. Scientists who had competed for funding now shared their research freely. Military leaders who had pointed weapons at each other now sat at the same tables and made plans. The message from the stars had called humanity violent and dangerous. It had demanded submission. It had threatened elimination. And in response, the human race did not scream or cry or surrender. They went silent. They shut down every signal that might escape into space. They pulled their communications inward. They hid their conversations from watching eyes, and they began to prepare somewhere in the depths of space. The Concorde noticed that Earth had gone dark somewhere in a crystal palace on a world made of glass. Arbiter Thiessen received a report that made her ancient heart freeze with fear. The humans knew they knew about the wall. They knew they had been caged, and now they had gone quiet in a way that felt less like fear and more like focus. For the first time in 12,000 years, Thiessen wondered if the Concorde had made a terrible mistake. She had no idea how right she was. One signal reached Earth, and the galaxy felt fear for the first time. The emergency session of the Galactic Concorde began with confusion and ended with war. High Arbiter Thiessen stood at the center of the great chamber, her crystal form casting rainbows across the walls as she delivered the news that had kept her awake for cycles. The quiet wall experienced a failure, she announced to the assembled representatives. A single beacon transmission reached the human planet, and they have decoded it. Murmurs spread through the chamber like ripples in water. How is that possible? Demanded Commandant Rethus of the Sarthi, his collective voice echoing from a dozen drone bodies at once. The wall was supposed to be perfect. Nothing is perfect, replied Pale Dawn of the Illumina, the ancient energy being flickering with what might have been resignation. I warned this council 12,000 years ago that containing this species was a mistake. And now we face the consequences. Rethus made a sound of disgust through all his bodies at once. Consequences? He sneered. What consequences could primitives possibly bring upon us? They have not even mastered fusion power, and they still burn dead plants for energy, and they fight wars over invisible gods and imaginary borders, and they are nothing. They were nothing, Thiessen corrected him quietly. Before today, they believed they were alone in the universe, and that belief kept them divided. But now they know the truth. And I have been watching their planet since the signal arrived. And what I see terrifies me. She activated a display that showed Earth from orbit. In the first hours after the signal was decoded, their global communications increased by 300% as their leaders spoke with each other. But then something changed, and over the past 6 cycles, their external communications have dropped to almost zero. They are hiding, Pale Dawn observed. No, Thiessen said, and her crystal body dimmed with worry. They are focusing, and every industrial center on their planet has shifted production, and their military forces have stopped fighting each other, and their scientists are sharing information across borders that have been hostile for generations. Rethus laughed, a harsh sound from 100 throats. So they are uniting, he said dismissively. It does not matter. And one fleet from the Sarti swarm could reduce their entire planet to ash in a single rotation. And I say we activate Protocol Silence and eliminate the threat before it grows. Protocol Silence was the Concorde's answer to species that proved too dangerous to control it had been used 17 times in the history of the galaxy. 17 species had been wiped from existence because the Concorde decided they could not be allowed to reach the stars. Pale Dawn flickered violently. You speak of genocide. As if it were nothing, the ancient being said. I have existed for 3 million years, and I have watched civilizations rise and fall. And I tell you now that destroying humanity would be a mistake we cannot undo. Then what do you suggest? Rethus demanded. We let them grow? We let them build ships and spread across the galaxy like a disease? Have you forgotten why we built the wall in the first place? I have forgotten nothing, Pale Dawn replied. But I have also learned that fear makes fools of the wise. And we caged humanity because we were afraid of what they might become. And now we consider killing them because we are afraid of what they might do. Enough. Thiessen interrupted before the argument could continue. We will put it to a vote and Protocol Silence or a continued observation. And the decision of the Concorde is final. The vote was close. The Sarthi voted for destruction. The Illuminar voted against the Vethkai. After long deliberation, cast the deciding vote in favor of Protocol Silence. I am sorry, Thiessen said to Pale Dawn after the session ended. But we cannot take the risk. And humanity is too unpredictable, too violent, too capable of destruction. Pale Dawn dimmed until it was barely visible. You will be sorry, the ancient being whispered, not because you made this choice, but because you made it too late. 300 Sarthi warships assembled at the edge of the solar system. They were massive vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to level a continent. Their hulls were grown from living chitin, and their weapons were powered by captive singularities. The Sarthi swarm had conquered 1,000 worlds with ships like these. Humanity had never seen anything like them. Commandant Rethus himself led the fleet from his flagship, a vessel so large it had its own gravity. He felt confident as his ships prepared to enter the human system. This would be quick and clean, a simple cleansing of a minor threat, nothing more. But as the fleet moved toward Earth, something unexpected happened on the third planet from the sun. A species that had never known it was being watched made preparations that would change the galaxy forever. In the 18 months since the signal arrived, humanity had worked without Restworld leaders who had never agreed on anything. Now shared intelligence and resources. Scientists in countries that had been enemies collaborated on projects that would have seemed impossible before. Every nuclear weapon on Earth was carefully taken apart and rebuilt into something new. Every satellite in orbit was given a secret purpose. Every factory worked day and night building things that looked like junk but served a hidden function. General Marcus Chun stood at the center of the global command bunker, watching screens that showed activity on every continent. He was 62 years old and had spent his whole life preparing for wars he hoped would never come. Now he faced a war that no one had ever imagined. Report, he said calmly. The alien fleet has been detected. Passing Jupiter, replied a young analyst. 300 vessels, matching the profiles we extracted from the intercepted signal. An estimated arrival at Earth orbit in 47 hours. Chun nodded slowly. Are we ready? Across the bunker, men and women from dozens of nations looked at each other. They had been enemies once. They had pointed weapons at each other and threatened destruction. Now they stood together against something far worse than any human conflict. We are ready, they answered as one. Chun allowed himself a small smile. The aliens thought humanity was primitive. They thought chemical rockets and nuclear weapons were the best humans could do. They had no idea that humans had spent 18 months studying every fragment of information in that intercepted signal. They had no idea that human scientists had reverse engineered the basic principles of Concord technology. They had no idea that every piece of space junk in the solar system had been quietly moved into position. The Sarthi fleet was coming to slaughter a primitive species that posed no threat. They would find something very different waiting for them. The trap was set. The bait was Earth itself, and humanity was done being afraid. General Chun turned to face his united command staff one final time. We did not ask for this war, he said quietly. We did not know we were prisoners until they told us. And we did not know we were hated until they came to kill us. But now we know. And now we will show them what humans do when we are cornered. He looked at the screens showing the approaching fleet. They built a cage to keep us contained. And they are about to learn why that was necessary. Outside, in the darkness of space, 300 alien warships approached Earth with confidence and contempt. They did not know they were flying into a trap. They did not know that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first day of their existence. They did not know that. They should have been afraid, but they would learn. One signal reached Earth, and the galaxy felt fear for the first time. The Sarthi fleet emerged from faster than light travel in a flash of twisted light and folded space. 300 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, arranged themselves in perfect formation between Jupiter and Mars from his command throne on the flagship. Commandant Rethus surveyed the system he had come to cleanse. Pathetic, he said through 1,000 mouths at once. Look at their defenses, and they have nothing but a few orbital stations and some primitive satellites. His sensors showed everything the humans had in space: small metal boxes that carried communication signals, a handful of stations where humans lived and worked, some robotic probes wandering the outer planets. Nothing that could threaten a Sarthi war fleet, nothing that mattered. Open a channel to the planet, Rethus commanded. Let them hear their doom before they die. The communication officer obeyed instantly. Across the void of space, a signal reached Earth carrying the voice of the alien commandant. People of Earth, Rethus announced with cold satisfaction. You have been judged by the Galactic Concord and found to be a threat to galactic stability. And you have one chance to surrender unconditionally, and if you refuse, your world will burn. And your species will end today. He expected screaming. He expected begging. He expected the terrified cries of primitives facing their extinction instead. His transmission simply stopped. The communication officer frantically checked his systems. Commandant, the officer said with confusion in his voice. "We have lost signal cohesion, and something is interfering with our broadcast." Before Rethus could respond, every light on the bridge flickered. Then the navigation systems went dark. Then the weapons locked themselves into standby mode. Then the life support systems began to stutter across 300 ships. The same thing was happening simultaneously. Alarms screamed in languages no human had ever spoken. Crew members who shared one mind suddenly felt that mind fracture into confusion and fear. "What is happening?" Rethus demanded, rising from his throne, and then a new transmission appeared on every screen in the fleet. It was a human face, a male with gray hair and calm eyes that showed no fear at all. "My name is General Marcus Chen," the human said, "and I am speaking to you in your own language, using your own communication protocols." Rethus stared at the screen in disbelief. "How?" was all he could manage to say. Chen almost smiled. 18 months ago, you sent us a signal by accident, and in that signal was more than just a threat. And there were protocols and frequencies and encryption keys, and you gave us everything we needed to learn how your technology works, on screens across the fleet." The human leaned forward. "You surrounded our world with a cage for 12,000 years, and you watched us grow, and you watched us suffer, and you watched us fight and die and struggle toward the stars. And you never helped us, and you never spoke to us. And you just watched and waited for us to destroy ourselves." His voice grew colder. "You called us dangerous. And you were right." Rethus finally found his voice. "You think a simple hack can stop the Sarti swarm?" He snarled. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds, and we have crushed species far more advanced than you. And when we restore our systems, we will burn your planet to dust." Chun shook his head slowly. "You still do not understand, and your systems are not coming back. And that is not the trap." He pressed a button on his console. "This is throughout the solar system." Thousands of objects suddenly came to life. They were asteroids and comets and chunks of ice that had been drifting through space for billions of years. But over the past 18 months, human engineers had visited them in secret. They had attached small engines to rocks the size of buildings. They had programmed simple guidance computers into frozen water. They had turned the natural debris of the solar system into weapons, and now those weapons ignited. Rethus watched his tactical display with growing horror as thousands of points of light appeared across the system. "What have you done?" he whispered. "We could not build warships," Chun replied. "We did not have time, and we did not have the technology. But we did have something else." On the display, the points of light began to move slowly at first, then faster and faster still. "We have rocks," Chun said simply. "And we have math, and we have 18 months of calculating exactly where your fleet would be when it arrived." The Sarthi fleet was crippled. Their engines would not respond. Their weapons would not fire. Their shields would not activate, and from every direction, thousands of kinetic impactors were accelerating toward them. Rethus gave orders that could not be followed. He screamed commands into systems that could not hear. He watched his tactical display fill with incoming projectiles that his ships could not avoid. The first impacts began 7 minutes later. A chunk of ice the size of a house struck a Sarthi cruiser at 30 kilometers per second. The ship did not explode so much as disintegrated, came apart in a spray of chitin and metal and bodies that scattered across the void. Then another impact, and another, and another. In 14 minutes, 283 Sarthi warships were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The flagship survived only because Rethus ordered his crew to manually restart the engines using backup systems that the human virus had not reached. 17 ships escaped into faster than light travel. 17 ships out of 300 as his flagship fled the system. Rethys looked back at the carnage on his screens. Thousands of his warriors were dead. The greatest fleet the Sarathi had sent in a century was destroyed, and they had been beaten by rocks, simple rocks thrown by primitives, who should not have been able to touch them. Commandant, his communication officer said quietly, "We are receiving one final transmission from the human planet." Rethys did not want to hear it, but he could not stop himself from listening. General Chun appeared on screen one last time. "Tell your Concord what happened here," the human said with that same terrifying calm. "Tell them that we remember 12,000 years of imprisonment. And tell them that we remember being treated like animals in a cage. And tell them that we are coming." The transmission ended, but Chun's final words echoed in Rethys' mind as his damaged fleet limped toward Concord space. "Tell them we are no longer afraid of the dark. And now they should be afraid of us." For the first time in his existence, Commandant Rethys of the Sarathi swarm understood what fear truly meant, and he knew with terrible certainty that humanity had only just begun. One signal reached Earth, and the galaxy felt fear for the first time. The footage of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire within 3 days. Every major power in the Concord had seen the recording that the surviving Sarathi ships carried home. They watched 300 warships arrive at a primitive world with confidence. They watched those same ships go dark and helpless in minutes. They watched rocks tear through armored hulls like paper. They watched the greatest military defeat in Sarathi history unfold in 14 terrible minutes, and for the first time in 8,000 years, the galaxy knew fear. High Arbiter Thiessen convened an emergency session of the Concord Council. But the mood in the great chamber was nothing like before. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. Its place was something cold and unfamiliar. "This is impossible," Thiessen said for perhaps the 100th time as she watched the recording play again on the central display. "They have no energy shields, and they have no plasma weapons. And they have not even discovered faster than light travel. And yet, they destroyed our fleet with rocks." "Not just rocks," Pale Dawn observed. The ancient illuminers form brighter than usual, with what might have been grim satisfaction. "Mathematics and rocks, and patience and rocks. And 18 months of preparation and rocks. And do you understand now why I warned you?" Commandant Rethys stood before the council as a broken creature. His swarm had lost 200,000 warriors in the battle. His reputation had been shattered along with his fleet. His confidence had died with his soldiers. "They knew we were coming," he said quietly through fewer mouths than before. "They knew exactly when and where we would arrive. And they had been preparing since the moment they received the signal. And we walked into a trap that they had spent 18 months building. Then we send a larger fleet," another Sarathi commander declared. 1,000 ships this time, and we burn their planet from orbit before they can respond." "And what if they have prepared for that too?" Pale Dawn asked. "What if they have already calculated where 1,000 ships would arrive? What if they have already moved more rocks into position? What if we send 1,000 ships and lose them all?" Silence fell across the chambers. The thought was unbearable, but it was also impossible to ignore. "We built the quiet wall to contain them," Thiessen said slowly. "We told ourselves it was for the good of the galaxy. And we told ourselves we were protecting civilization from a dangerous species. But now I wonder if we were simply buying time. Time for what?" Rethys asked at Dessen's crystal form, dimmed with something like despair. "Time before they inevitably escaped. And time before they came for us. While the Concord debated and argued and feared, humanity worked the wreckage of the Sarathi fleet, drifted through the solar system in clouds of shattered metal and frozen bodies, human salvage. Teams moved through the debris with careful purpose. They collected every piece of alien technology they could find. They studied every fragment of hull, material, and every broken weapon system, and 11 months after the battle, human scientists achieved the impossible. They built a faster-than-light drive. It was crude by Concorde standards. A massive engine that could barely push a small ship beyond light speed. It was dangerous, with a failure rate that would have horrified any alien engineer. But it worked. First human ship to travel faster than light was called Defiance. It was an old cargo freighter that had been rebuilt. Around the alien engine, its captain was a woman named Captain Yuki Tanaka, who had volunteered for what everyone believed would be a one-way mission, but Defiance did not carry weapons. It carried something far more dangerous. It carried hope. Captain Tanaka's first stop was a world called Kethris 4, a planet in a system that the Concorde had conquered 3,000 years ago. The native species, the Kethrani, had once been proud explorers who reached for the stars. The Concorde had destroyed their ships and bombed their cities and broken their spirit. Now they lived as servants to their conquerors. Forbidden from space travel, forbidden from science, forbidden from hope. When Defiance appeared in their sky, the Kethrani thought it was another Concorde ship come to deliver new orders instead. They received a transmission in their own language. "My name is Captain Yuki Tanaka of the human vessel Defiance." The message said, 18 months ago, my species defeated a Sarathi invasion fleet using nothing but rocks and determination. And we are here to share what we have learned. The Kethrani did not believe it at first. How could they believe that a species they had never heard of had defeated the mighty Sarathi? But Captain Tanaka had proof. She transmitted the footage of the battle. She transmitted the plans for the electromagnetic weapons that had crippled the alien fleet. She transmitted instructions for building the simple technology that had turned rocks into world killers, and then she transmitted something more important than any weapon: a message. "I'm not alone anymore," Captain Tanaka told the Kethrani. "The Concorde taught us to fear the dark. But we have learned that we are the light, and we offer you the same chance we gave ourselves. And you can remain slaves, or you can stand up. And the choice is yours." Defiance stayed at Kethris 4 for only 3 days before moving on, but in those 3 days, Captain Tanaka changed everything within a month. The Kethrani had rebuilt their first spaceship in 3,000 years within 3 months. They had attacked and destroyed a Concorde outpost in their system within 6 months. They had inspired 4 neighboring species to do the same, and Defiance kept moving. Captain Tanaka visited world after world, species after species. She found the Varati, who had been forbidden from developing technology beyond steam power. She found the Milani, whose population had been reduced to breeding stock for Sarathi food supplies. She found the crystalline choir, energy beings who had been enslaved by the Illuminator and forced to power their cities. To each of them, she brought the same gift: knowledge, weapons, and hope. The rebellions began slowly. At first, a ship destroyed here, an outpost burned there. But as word spread and species connected with each other, the pace accelerated. Within 2 years of the battle at Earth, the Galactic Concorde was fighting uprisings on 100 fronts. Their fleets were stretched thin, trying to maintain control. Their ancient alliances began to crack under the pressure, and everywhere the fighting spread, one message appeared again and again: humanity sends its regards. General Chun, now Admiral Chun, watched the reports come in from across the galaxy. He stood in a command center that had grown from a bunker into the heart of a galactic revolution. "We did not plan for this," he admitted to Captain Tanaka, who had returned to Earth after her historic journey. "We only wanted to survive. And now we have started a fire that is spreading across the stars." Tanaka smiled. "We gave them the spark," she said. "They provided the fuel, and centuries of oppression and hatred and fear. And the Concorde built their empire on suffering. And now that suffering is tearing them apart, Chan nodded slowly. And what comes next? Tanaka looked at the star map showing the spreading rebellions. Now we build something better, she said. Not a cage, and not an empire, and something new. And something that would have been impossible if they had not tried to destroy us. Outside, in the void between stars, the galaxy was burning, and humanity had only just begun to fan the flames. One signal reached Earth, and the galaxy felt fear for the first time. The Galactic Concord did not fall in a single battle. It collapsed slowly over 5 years, dying piece by piece as the fires of rebellion consumed everything it had built. The Sarathi swarm fractured first, their hive mind, which had held billions of bodies together as one consciousness for millennia, began to break apart under the strain of fighting on 100 fronts individual. Sarathi started thinking for themselves for the first time in their species' history. Some continued to fight for the Concord, others joined the rebellion, and many simply fled into the darkness between stars, trying to escape the chaos they had helped create. The Illuminator withdrew from physical space entirely. The ancient energy beings had always considered themselves above the struggles of lesser creatures, but when their enslaved species rose against them, when the crystalline choir shattered their power stations and darkened their cities, the Illuminator realized that even gods could fall. They retreated into dimensions that other beings could not reach, leaving behind the empire they had helped build for millions of years. Only the Vethkai remained. High Arbiter Thyssen watched her civilization crumble and understood that the end had come. The crystal beings had always prided themselves on their wisdom and their ability to see the long view of history. Now Thyssen saw the future with terrible clarity. The Concord was finished. The old order was dead, and humanity stood at the center of the new galaxy, ready to decide what would rise in its place. Thyssen sent a message requesting a meeting. She expected to be ignored or rejected. Instead, she received coordinates and a time. She traveled alone to the meeting place, a neutral station in unclaimed space. The station had once been a Concord outpost. Now it flew a new flag, one that showed a blue planet surrounded by stars, the flag of the human coalition. Admiral Marcus Chen was waiting for her in the station's main chamber. He was older now, his hair fully gray and his face marked by 5 years of war, but his eyes were the same as they had been in that first transmission. Calm and cold and utterly without fear behind him stood Captain Yuki Tanaka and a dozen other human officers, and behind them, visible through the station's windows, hung a fleet of warships. They were not crude converted freighters anymore. They were proper warships, built with technology salvaged and stolen and invented. Over 5 years of conflict, human ships mixed with vessels from the Kathrani and the Varati, and a dozen other species that had joined the rebellion. It was the largest fleet ever assembled. That was not controlled by the Concord, and it belonged to the species that the Concord had tried to silence. We underestimated you, Thyssen said, her crystal form dull with exhaustion. We saw your violence and your divisions and your constant conflict, and we assumed it made you weak. And we did not understand that it made you adaptable. And you were never fragile, and you were tempering yourselves. And every war and every struggle and every fall and rise, you were practicing. Chum studied the alien with an expression she could not read. You kept us caged because you were afraid of what we might become. Yes, and now? Thyssen's form flickered with something like pain. Now we know we were right to fear you, but we were wrong to cage you. And the Concord is broken, and the old order is gone. And you could destroy us now, and you could enslave us. And you could do to us what we planned to do to you. The silence stretched across the chamber. Human and alien faced each other across a gulf of history and hatred and 12,000 years of imprisonment. Then, Admiral Chen did something that confused Thiessen more than anything else in this strange and terrible war. He extended his hand. "We are not like you," he said quietly. "We do not cage species for being potential threats. And we do not silence worlds because they are different. And we do not build walls to keep others in darkness." Thiessen stared at the offered hand. "I do not understand." Chen almost smiled. "I know. And that is exactly why the Concord failed. And you could never imagine showing mercy to a defeated enemy. And you could never imagine helping someone weaker instead of conquering them. And you looked at us and saw only our violence without understanding what drives it." He kept his hand extended. "We fight because we have to, not because we want to. And we are violent because the universe forced us to be. And we wage war so that one day we will not have to. And you saw our worst qualities and feared them. But you never understood that those same qualities are connected to our best. And what are your best qualities?" Thiessen asked softly. "We protect the weak," Chen said. "We stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. And we fight against bullies and tyrants and anyone who would cage others in darkness. And yes, we are dangerous. And yes, you were right to fear us. But understand this." He stepped closer to her. "The galaxy feared the wrong thing. And they feared what humanity might do. And they should have feared what humanity is. And what is that?" Chen's smile grew, and it was not cruel or cold, but something stranger. It was proud. "We are the species that looks into the void and refuses to blink. And we are the ones who befriend wolves and tame fire and walk on moons because someone told us we could not. And we are the ones who survive extinction-level events through sheer determination. And we are the ones who never give up. And we are the ones who always find a way." He took Thiessen's crystal appendage in his hand. "You built a wall to keep us out. And we did not tear it down out of hatred. And we tore it down because walls do not stop us. And nothing stops us." He gripped her hand firmly. "Welcome to the new galaxy, Arbiter, and you will find that we make better allies than enemies. And together we will build something that the old Concord never could. And we will build a future where no species lives in a cage and no world is silenced. And no one has to be afraid of the dark anymore." Thiessen felt something she had not felt in centuries. Hope. But Chen added, his grip tightening just slightly, "Never, ever try to cage us again." Outside the station, the combined fleet of humanity and its allies hung in the darkness of space. Once they had been prisoners. Once they had been prey. Now they were something else entirely. They were the light in the darkness. They were the voice of the voiceless. They were the beginning of something new and far away. On a small blue planet that had been caged for 12,000 years, children looked up at the stars for the first time without fear. The galaxy had kept humanity in darkness, believing silence would keep them safe. They had forgotten the first lesson of the cosmostars are born in darkness, and humanity had always been destined to burn bright, enough to light the way for everyone else. The cage was broken, the silence was ended, and the future belonged to those brave enough to reach for it. This was not the end of the story, it was only the beginning.